Good morning, everyone. Hi, and thanks for joining us for this session to discuss how we can use education and entrepreneurship to empower girls and women in less privileged communities across Asia. I'm Lee Williamson. I'm the Regional Editorial Director of Gen.T, and I'll be introducing the speakers this morning. Now, for today's session, we're joined by four fantastic speakers, each armed with years of experience in education, philanthropy, and social impact. Chong Xiaowei, our Southeast Asia editor, will be moderating the discussion, which will run for about 30 minutes, after which we'll proceed to an audience Q&A before we conclude the session at around 12 p.m. Hong Kong, Singapore time. Now, for some quick housekeeping matters. Today's session is being recorded. The video will be posted on Gen.T's web and social channels next week, should you wish to share this conversation with people in your network. As our speakers discuss the topic, we really would love to see what everyone else thinks as well. So please continue to keep typing away in the chat box. We'd love to see your comments, as well as your questions that you have for our panelists. We'll try to get to all of them during the audience Q&A session at the end as well. If you'd like to direct your question to a specific panelist, please also state their name in your question. Finally, if you're posting about this session on social media, we would love to see it. Please do tag us using the handles you can see on your screen right now. Now, before we proceed, we'd first like to thank our partner Aide Action International for making this session possible, a French NGO with a mission to promote access to education for all through cooperation, empowerment, and the development of skills of local citizens. Aide Action works with the most marginalized and vulnerable population across 19 countries. To share more, I'm delighted to join Irina Bazniev, International Philanthropy Manager at Aide Action. Welcome, Irina.
Thank you. Thank you for this fantastic presentation. Thank you so much. I'm Irina Bazniev. I'm an international philanthropy manager in Aide Action, and I have really something special for you. Just allow me to share my screen. Yeah, can you see it? I just returned from a field trip to Africa, and I met a fantastic adolescent girl from Togo who is called Hannah Akasima. I met there, and he said to me that it's not my fault that I was born in poverty. It's not my fault that I grew up in poverty. But if I'm an adult and I still live in poverty, that will be my fault. Education is the key to lift me out of poverty and to ensure a dignified life for me and for my family. And what she said has propelled me to rethink the transformative power of education. As a woman who has the privilege of having my own career, I'm sincerely and deeply grateful for the education I have had a chance to get. But does every girl in this world have equal access to education? We all know the answer, and the answer is no. And Aide Action would like to make a difference. This is the photos from the field. But Aide Action, what is it about? Aide Action is an international nonprofit working in 19 countries around the world, which is supporting the development of sustainable educational projects. We're headquartered in Paris, and we have been implementing projects around the globe for more than 40 years. We have been working in Southeast Asia since 2003, first in Cambodia and later in Vietnam in Lao PDR. We also used to have our programs in China and in Myanmar. And since 2008, we also have our office in Hong Kong. Aide Action puts women and girls front and center in all its programs. Aide Action has transformed the lives of the most vulnerable and marginalized groups in need for the past 4 decades. We learned that empowering girls and women is a crucial lever to accelerate sustainable change. And we're deeply convinced that education is the best way to transform lives, to ensure peace, and to establish social and economic stability in development in marginalized communities. Women and girls are, and this is very well known, half of the world population and half of its potential, but they are now also one of the most vulnerable groups, especially during the pandemic. And UNESCO has warned that most of the world's 773 million illiterate adults are women, and twice as many girls as boys still will never start school. It's a huge challenge for governments, for associations, for non-governmental organizations to close this gender gap in education, and sure, the pandemic makes the situation worse. Girls and women are at the top of the vulnerability pyramid. They are the most affected when emergencies like COVID-19 hit. Girls are the first one to stay at home and to support their families, especially in times of crisis. And increased dropout rates disproportionately affect adolescent girls, further entrench gender gaps in education, and lead to increased risk of sexual exploitation, early pregnancy, and early and unfortunately frequently forced marriages. According to UNESCO, an additional 11 million girls may never come back to school and might be forced to join the ranks of 130 million girls who were already out of school before the pandemic. And if we don't act now, the negative impact will and may last for decades. Women and girls need your support to safeguard the gains in education. And this support is needed right now. It's really urgent. And to tackle the challenge and address such an urgent issue, Aide launched its Education for Women Now global philanthropic campaign, which is a movement of philanthropists, foundations, and corporate change makers who are passionate about ensuring access to education and removing gender inequality barriers. And the campaign's targeted programs will make sure that 3 million women and girls gain access or continue to profit from quality education within our programs. Denise Epoter, chair of the campaign committee, because this campaign has its own campaign committee, and Denise also a director of TV5 Monde Africa, which is an international television network. She says, Nelson Mandela referred to education as the most powerful weapon to change the world. Education is a weapon of mass construction. So let's hand it to girls and women because they are the ones who will change the world. And we are deeply convinced that the corporate world and philanthropists have their own role to play in supporting the cause of girls' education and women empowerment. And this role is very highly important. It's highly important and impactful. And we are calling for action. Please join our movement, our campaign, our great cause today. It's urgent. And this way you will give girls and women the power, the capacity to act tomorrow and to build a better future for all of us. Now I propose to watch a short video about our campaign.
Thank you so much, Arena. Arena's comments in that video really have set the scene and exactly what's at stake for our discussion this morning. I'd also like to personally thank Arena for joining us. It's 4 a.m. her time. She's in Paris. I believe only a few hours ago she returned from Geneva and she hasn't been to bed yet. Arena, please stay with us and watch the discussion, then go get some well-earned rest. I'm now going to hand over to Xiaowei, our moderator, to introduce our speakers and kick off the discussion. Xiaowei, good morning. Over to you.
Hi, thanks Lee, and welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us at this session. So let's start off with a statistic. 773 million adults are illiterate globally, and most of them are women. And reiterating what Arena mentioned earlier, girls are more than twice as likely to not go to school at all. And with the COVID situation right now, this has only become worse. So some 11 million girls who did actually get the chance to attend school may never return to their classrooms after the pandemic. The obvious injustice aside, girls and women make up close to half of the world's population. This means that if more of them are unable to attend or finish their school, the greater the challenge a developing nation faces of pulling its people out of poverty and ensuring its own social and economic stability. So what is causing the gender gap in education? Is it just lack of access to a school? How can we prioritize equal access to education for everyone, but particularly girls and women? And what challenges do governments and NGOs face in this respect? To discuss all this and more, I'm joined by a panel of experts from the education, social impact, and philanthropy sectors. So let's introduce them to you. First, we have Didi Chan, who is an investment banker by training. Today, she leads her family's philanthropic foundation, Seal of Love Charitable Foundation, where she has overseen impact-driven investments in education as well as healthcare. So Didi is also a managing director and the chief investment officer of Park Lane Capital Holdings, her family's single-family office. Next, we have Joanna Ho Tong, the founder of KG Group, which is an award-winning company specializing in children's arts and English language education. She also holds several other titles, including board member of the Women's Foundation, a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to improving the lives of girls and women in Hong Kong. And last but not least, we have Savi Laj. So Savi is an educator who has been campaigning for children's rights to quality education, particularly within the world's most under-resourced communities. He has extensive experience in building and implementing projects that have enabled children to develop their full potential and contribute to their communities. He is also currently a deputy CEO of Aide Action and director overseeing its Southeast Asia and China projects. So welcome panelists. Thank you so much for joining us. I would like to kick off with a question for all of you. So many of us in this Zoom session today have had the privilege of getting an education, and that's something that we sometimes forget. Access to education is a privilege, but it's also a human right that millions of people around the world have not been able to enjoy. From your own experiences in this space, what is one of the biggest barriers that's stopping girls in particular from getting educated? Maybe we can start with Didi first.
Sure. So our foundation works a lot in Southeast Asia. So I can speak sort of to our experience in Southeast Asia. Another thing that I do, which I encourage other philanthropists to do as well, is to actually bring in other philanthropists and peers, with you when you go and travel to these places where you want to help the communities. So I've brought groups to Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, India, just to kind of see what is the situation on the ground. And from our observations, a lot of the barriers stem down to poverty and also patriarchal values that hinder the opportunities for girls. And within poverty, you have accessibility, as you mentioned. We need to ensure that rural roads are weather resistant, that there's actually a way for girls to get to school. Also, basic needs like clean drinking water, toilets, things like that. But I think that the patriarchal values that I'm talking about is just one of the biggest barriers, because girls who are not told that they have the same value as a boy in a family, right? And that they're always going to be the default person to take care of domestic duties, or, if there's only one child that a family can afford to send to school, it's not going to be the girl. I think that's one of the biggest barriers that we face.
Thanks so much, Didi. Savi, what do you have to add to that?
Thank you, Shirley, for having me. I mean, connects to what Didi has said. I mean, as speaking from a developing country standpoint, I mean, you have cultural barrier. It's also an issue. As most of the family, actually, when you have a sibling, where you have either boy or a girl, and then mostly the parent would choose to have boy to go to school, essentially. At the very early years, usually both of them go to school, and especially in primary education. But then when it comes to go to secondary education, sometimes the family, as it links to poverty, as Didi has said, family have to have a choice that either if they cannot afford to send both of them to school, they either choose either boy or girl. And most probably, most of the cultural issue is that they will send the boy to school, because the fact that when the girl is going, it's a little bit more grown. Essentially, most of the parents keep them at the domestic work to have a lot of work. So this cultural bias, actually, it exists in many countries where we work. And this is actually preventing girls from access to education in most situations.
That's interesting. It only happens, we only see it more palpable when it's coming to secondary education, you mentioned. Joanna, what do you have to add to that in the context of maybe Hong Kong, where most of your work is?
Yeah, in Hong Kong, obviously, we are comparatively fortunate than a lot of other countries across the world. We have a government that's committed to providing free education for everyone up to age 16. So in that sense, we are fortunate. However, of course, there are still factors in Hong Kong that are holding our girls back. So, for example, the socioeconomic factors will play a part. We have the impression that Hong Kong is a very affluent place, and that people are very focused, that families are very focused on educating their children and their girls. But actually, there are many pockets of society where girls in particular are not receiving the opportunities that perhaps boys are, or that other groups of society are. So, for example, there are ethnic minorities in Hong Kong who are treated differently and also respond differently to the educational opportunities that are available to them. There are also additional pressures put on girls in many areas. Girls are also expected to look after their younger siblings. They're also expected to do other household chores, which perhaps their brothers are not expected to do, or the male members of the household are not expected to do. And as we know, in Hong Kong, there are people living in very, very small apartments. There's not a lot of space. So it can become increasingly difficult for a girl to actually, she's in school, but to remain focused in school and to actually achieve in school is not easy.
Thank you so much for sharing. So Savi, if I can go to you next for our next question. Ensuring that every girl's right to education has great positive impacts, as Irina mentioned earlier. What are some of the most significant ones we're looking at?
Thank you, Zoe, for questions, very important questions. As a number of studies has been backing on this aspect. I mean, the study from a global partnership research in education, for instance, if I was to increase 1 percentage point of girl education, this will lead to a rate of across domestic product 0.3%, which is result in annual growth of domestic product with 0.2. So these are very crucial issues. That's why girl education women will essentially have an impact on economy and also from a household standpoint.
Thank you so much. So maybe Didi, do you want to add anything to that? From what
so yeah, the question is, how does gender equitable education help entire communities, right?
No, sorry. So it's actually, what are some of the most significant benefits to providing education to girls and women?
Well, yeah, it lifts in the entire community economically. That's one, because one of the most pressing issues is poverty, right? And if we don't actually see girls and women being half of the workforce that will lift, the communities out of poverty, we're leaving a lot on the table. So, if girls can, even get to a vocational education level, and the communities that we work with, it costs very little for the actual education itself, right? For a vocational degree, it can cost us anywhere for a scholarship for a girl between 500 and 1,500 US dollars a year, right? And we found that it was the parents who actually were our biggest barrier, because they haven't seen modeled for them what actually can happen if they allow their girls to pursue these years of education. And so what we've had to do is actually do a lot of education to the parents, right? Because it's still a very cultural thing to obey your parents and listen to what your parents say. So if the parents aren't convinced that this is something that's good for them as a family and then the community, then we don't have any buy-in at all. So what we've had to do is really to not only educate and inform the parents, but also provide economic subsidy for the opportunity costs of their daughter going to school. And so that became an additional cost to getting the whole family to buy in. And once you have a family in a village who models this, and then their daughter graduates, let's say from hotel school, right, which takes 2 years, and they can actually come out with a hotel school degree. And I mentioned hotel school because in a lot of the countries that we're talking about in Southeast Asia, before COVID, tourism was the biggest driver of economic growth, from agriculture to tourism and the service industry. And so when you are able to fully see a girl go through a 2-year hotel school education program and they come out, they make 4 times what their family makes on the farm, that is super powerful, right? And then when you see that modeled in your village or your community, that creates buy-in for the whole community. And besides economic sort of the economic effect, right, of lifting out of poverty, I think there's a really strong confidence building aspect and trauma healing aspect in girls' psyches, right, which is a sort of unquantifiable part of healing a whole country.
Yeah, I think that's something we probably don't talk enough about. It's the mental effects, the positive mental effects it has on girls and women when they get an education. But I think what I'm deducing from what you and Savi have been saying is that when we educate a girl or a woman, it's not just an impact on the individual, it's an impact that affects the community, their families, their parents, as well as their countries, right? It's a general economic growth and benefits that we are seeing here. So Joanna.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think it's also, we all know that diversity improves outcomes. So if you have all male boards or if you have all male teams, it's not going to create the best outcome that's possible, whether that's purely financial and business outcome or whether it's an organizational outcome. We know that diversity will make those outcomes better. So having girls and women join those organizations is really, really important.
So Joanna, maybe we can stay on you for a bit. So you've been an educator for many years and you've worked with underprivileged girls and women in Hong Kong for quite a few years as well. So when we talk about access to quality education, we're actually not just talking about access to a school. What other factors do you think needs to be addressed such that girls are given opportunities to reach their full potential?
So as I said earlier, we are very lucky in Hong Kong. We have access to schools and our children are required to go to school. But obviously, there are different types of schools and we work within quite a rigid school system. So while we have the benefits of outstanding education, technically and academically, is our education being delivered in the way that's truly useful to our girls, to all of us, as they grow up and as they start to enter the workforce? I think that's really the big question here. And if I can refer to a recent study that the Women's Foundation actually commissioned the Education University to look into girls taking up STEM courses. So, how many girls compared to boys are deciding to study science subjects in school, for example. And the research shows that girls just don't. Girls are not moving into STEM subjects. Sometimes it's socioeconomic. If you come from a family, a disadvantaged family, you may not have ever heard of some of the things that you can study. And so maths, for example, is a compulsory subject in Hong Kong secondary schools, but none of the other sciences are compulsory. They're all electives. So you may not know what chemistry is or biology is, or because you just haven't had that nurture, that environment in your family as you're growing up. So I think there are barriers there for girls already. There's a lot of social pressure with girls. There's also research to show that girls tend to choose areas that are more nurturing, that are more community oriented, whereas boys tend to choose more individualistic type pathways. So I think for children, or for girls who are growing up in an environment, in a family that is embracing all of this and is providing the best opportunity for the girl, it's fantastic, it's all there. But if you're in a family that is ignorant perhaps of some of these issues and you just don't know the path, it's very easy for a girl to become unstuck and to become disengaged from the system. And the system is really all about tests and memorization and exams and moving to the next level. So it's missing out that whole area where girls and women in particular bring a huge range of skills, huge range of social skills, of creative skills, communication ability. All of these things are just as important. Now, a wealthy child can take these extra classes. They can go for co-curricular courses. They can study drama. They can study art. They can do all sorts of things. But again, children who don't have access to those, don't have the advantage of those, are actually getting a very narrow prescriptive education. And that's harmful in many ways.
Savi, I saw you nodding a couple of times. Do you want to add to that? What other factors do you think we need to address in order for girls to get the opportunity to reach their full potential in school?
Thank you very much. I mean, connecting from Jonah and also Didi. I mean, when we look at our programming in Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, for instance, after a long school closure due to the COVID-19, we identify, as Irina also presented earlier, is that many of the girls who actually already have a high chance of dropout before pandemic, and during pandemic, that many of them are out of school. This was actually a very amplified signature signs that we would not be able to get girls back to school if we continue to do the same thing as we do now. But this is exactly what we at Aide we also reoriented our programs to focus on the girl back to school. We essentially we work very closely with Ministry of Education of the country where we worked, and to focus on a learning loss of the children during the pandemic. And during the very first academic year, we focused on building capacity of teachers along with the teacher, how they are to cope with the learning loss during the pandemic. Bear in mind, the situation in Cambodia and in Laos, for instance, during the school closure, where the government also provide online learning through a TV, but majority, more than half, 50% of the children and family do not have access to even such a digital requirement. So more than half of them are cut off from during the online learning. So what we do is to provide support, and essentially we work very closely with parents of the children to provide support to them so that they can send back their children to school. And at the same time, as Didi said earlier, the poverty is also the issue, because sometimes when you come back to school, you require more additional material, and this is something that Aide also provide material support, learning and teaching materials to the teachers, so that we can support more girls to go back to school. And there is no one specific approach, we could do that. Essentially, we tailor our program to the specific need of the girl, because the girl come up with the situation from one to another. It's very different. It's not the same needs, it's a different needs. So that's why our program is essentially designed to customize the specific needs so that we can get more back girls to school. We actually revamping our programming to focus on this aspect, while we know that this is becoming a very, very urgent issue for us.
So you mentioned earlier that you're working with parents as well to help girls go back to school. Maybe you can go a little bit deeper on it. How can we mobilize parents as well as the communities around the girls to support this pushing of girls back into school after the pandemic?
It's very important questions that during the discussion, we have our parenting meeting, community meeting, but sometimes it's not possible to organize physically. It's sometimes we organize either through a WhatsApp chat, a Telegram chat. So these are the parent group that we try to support when they have difficulty. So it's a lot of things we do through our campaign, but before in pandemic, during the pandemic, sometimes we can organize physical campaign. We essentially is to raise the importance of girl education, and also to have a dimension of cultural change setting that most of the family have, that if they have to choose whether to send boy or girl to school, they maybe send the boy to school. So a kind of instill a new cultural dimension to have to provide an equal opportunity for boy and girl. It's kind of the activity that we support the parent, how important of girl. And of course, it also demonstrates, as Didi highlight. At some point, we also have the role model, actually a girl coming from a village who are very successful, either becoming entrepreneur or becoming a successful professional, as part of our speaker to speak about the girl can play a very key role and can be anything they want if they get education. So that's this kind of message to also to remind the message, to also spread the message across to the parent community why girl education is equally important as boy.
Thank you so much. So Didi, can I go over to you now? So most of your work, as you mentioned, is in Southeast Asia. But what do you think are the key challenges that governments are facing when it comes to bringing learning environments to the most marginalized of girls?
For governments, I think it really is like whether it's like there is chicken or egg, whether they're the issue or they're solving the issue, right? So a lot of what we see is corruption is a big problem, and we need to protect our girls by giving them sex education, right? So that they know early on, what are the pitfalls or the consequences of actions, how to protect themselves. And also one of the systemic issues in Southeast Asia is human trafficking, right? And so that all boils down to just a lot of loopholes and, corruption across different, kind of structures of the power dynamics in society. I think it's challenging for philanthropists when we come in to get a real handle on that, because we're not there full time, right? And so one of the things that I think that foundations and philanthropists really need to do is from the get-go, from the beginning, is to empower and build teams of locals, or if you're grant making only, to really find organizations that themselves, they empower and train and are building up leadership teams of locals, right? Because it's really the people on the ground who truly understand the deep complexities of everything that's going on and know how to navigate the nuances in order to still get positive outcomes. And one organization that I traveled with to India is called Empower Asia, and they're focused, mainly on girls' education, just like our topic today, especially teenage girls, adolescent and teenage girls. And as a grant-making entity, Empower did something that I thought was extremely useful, which is they set up something called a Girls Advisory Council, right? So a Girls Advisory Council is, under the creation of this is under the belief that girls can and should be seen as experts of their own lives, and that they're capable of directing and leading change. And so if you form a group of adolescent girl leaders who actually advise your grant making strategy in the region, and give them the leadership, to actually, and the power to actually have a say in how, the direction of your grant making is going, I think that's very, very powerful, and that's part of getting local stakeholders involved, but not just, local, senior team members, also engaging the actual person and the people who are benefiting, ultimately from your decision-making process.
Joanna, what about you? What do you see the challenges that the Hong Kong government faces? Is it similar to what Didi mentioned?
I think the structure in Hong Kong is well established. We don't have issues with structural issues, or we don't have big corruption issues, that sort of thing that exists elsewhere. I think what the issues in Hong Kong are bureaucratic, frankly, and we're very stuck in our ways, and we're very, very slow to change in Hong Kong in terms of what we're delivering in education. For example, if we're thinking about girls specifically, there's the soft side of learning, the actual, teaching girls to be more confident, teaching girls to speak up is really lacking in schools. This is not just a Hong Kong thing, but obviously girls tend to be quieter. Girls are actually often better students in that they concentrate more, they take notes more, they're more careful with their work, they present things more carefully. Whereas boys are, tend to be a bit scrappier in that sense. But what's happening is that girls are not feeling able to speak up. They want everything to be perfect. They want to achieve all the tasks exactly as they are being expected to. They're very, very worried about the teacher's opinion of them, etc. They find it more difficult to debate, to discuss. And the curriculum and the system that we have in Hong Kong does not enable them to do that, not in our local education system. And I have to say, the other thing is, it's not just about the schools and the government, it's actually about the parents, because our parents have grown up in a system that is very, very restricted and very structured. So the parents feel insecure if their children don't have enough homework, or if their children are starting to do things that are outside the academic learning, or we're not getting enough certificates, or where's the exam for this? So it really is, I think it's a three-part issue that we're looking at here. It's the government, but it's also it's parents, and then the girls themselves, creating an environment where girls actually feel more empowered to speak up, even if it's just in the classroom as a starting point.
So if I can just add to that, so we're looking at pushing for a gender equitable education system, right? But are we looking at, does it mean that we should be catering to girls and boys' needs specifically? Or should we be creating equal opportunities for both and be treating them both as equals? What would be the argument here?
So for parents who can afford it to send their children to private school, they have a choice to send their daughters to co-ed schools or to girls' schools, right? If you can't afford it and you're allocated to a school, then you kind of go where you're given. But there are advantages and disadvantages in both methods. Girls' schools, girls tend to perform better, especially in science subjects. And I think because it's just girls, a lot of the pressures are taken out of the equation as to, do I have the confidence to speak up? Do I have all of this sort of the soft skills? I think is much easier. However, a co-educational school is, of course, a much better reality of our world. And it does have the benefits of diversity. And it's important that girls can speak against boys and speak up with boys there and learn to live alongside boys and not treat them as some exotic, other gender that they have that later they will come across. I think there are so many issues here. So it really depends on the child. So yeah, I think this is a very difficult argument.
Savi, maybe I can push the next question to you. So on top of the gender gap in education, I think this is something that Joanna mentioned earlier. There is also a learning crisis where being in school isn't the same as being as learning something. So not all education systems in poorer regions in the world are equipped to collect information on who is actually learning and who's not. How do you think we can address this to make systems and curriculums more effective and relevant to girls especially?
But thank you. As I remember the study on Picasa from the World Bank essentially identified the learning crisis around the world. As a student, essentially sometimes even at grade 3 or grade 4, they are not be able to read and write. So this was the research done by the World Bank. Most of the developing countries, especially in Southeast Asia, saying the prevalence in Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, of course, there has been much more in the difficult situation if it compares to Malaysia or Vietnam. For instance, it's the early education's quite better off than many other developing countries member in Asian member. So these are the key issue that's along with Ministry of Education also development partner working on that aspect. It's a very complex issue because most of the situation is the fact that most of the curriculum was that backdates a very long time without much of revising a curriculum where the situation and circumstances change so much. So these are the issue of curriculum that also links to the cultural aspect in the country where we work. I think this is a very issue that the government needs to work on it. They already know that. They obviously based on the research finding, they understand the issue. But it's also the issue of lacking resource is also another issue, and lack of proper trained teacher. This is another issue across the country who have under resource. We're taking example in Cambodia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, for instance. These are the countries who have also limited resource to provide a teacher capacity development. I think it's very crucial that we need to have more support on providing the capacities to teachers so that they better understand the issue that they're facing, and so they can revise on the way they teach, the way they support the students. They could essentially have.
Joanna, if I can go back to you for a bit. I know just now you mentioned some gender-related biases within schools and classrooms, right? But there's also situations outside of the schools and classrooms that may hamper a girl's ambition or her ability to actually complete her education. Things like gender-based violence, for example, or as I think Didi mentioned earlier, ensuring that there are accessible roads for them that are safe for them to get to school. How do you think we can address some of this discrimination or situations that may actually hinder a girl's ability to finish her education?
Yeah, I think the gender-based violence or fear of violence, even if it's not actually taking place, there is the fear of violence. Some of the schools, I mean, kids can go to school in Hong Kong, but some of the schools are pretty rough. There's a lot of peer pressure, social media pressures on girls, image, huge amount of image consciousness, which girls take, I think, particularly strongly. These are all issues that are within the school system, but also outside the school system. And I think in Hong Kong, most people do have access to technology. Unlike some of the other areas we're talking about, they do have access to technology. They're also then at the receiving end of a barrage of information as to how girls should be, what girls should look like, how girls should speak, how they should behave, what they should be doing. So, as many other developed countries have. So I think that places a lot of pressure on them as well. I think the school system does not support them in the types of future pathways that they could take. It's so prescriptive and so academic that there are many pathways that all people can take, not just girls. but it's not giving them the opportunity to explore the arts, to explore humanities more, to actually prepare themselves for a world where even if you train as an accountant, you have no idea whether you're going to be able to get a job in the future, because the way our world is changing, we have to train all of our young people to be extremely flexible. And I think all of that combined, it's very confusing for girls, actually. It's confusing for all young people at the moment, particularly with the pandemic. But it's particularly confusing for girls because what is the role of a girl? What is the role of a girl? Is she supposed to get married and have children? Is she supposed to have a career? How do you balance it? It gets into this sort of situation. And that kind of pressure starts young. It doesn't start when you're 18 and you graduate, or when you're 16. It starts when you're young and you see your mum, or you see the other women around you, and you see the behaviors that are taking place with men and women. So I think, yeah, there is a lot of extra pressure on girls in that way.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So Didi,
Can I just add to what Joanna said? I sit on the court of Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, HKUST, and on the advancement committee of HKUST. And the dean of sciences and the engineering dean, a lot of the issue that we see for incoming students into the freshman class is always, the gender inequality in STEM, is still evident. Whereas in a lot of the top universities in the US, they've already closed the gap, right? And so what is it that they did, and what is it that Hong Kong needs to do to get more girls into STEM? And if you look at the just pure kind of like applications, right, it's obvious that at age 18, the applications being put in for the STEM majors at HKUST are for girls, they're not as strong, right, as the one for the boys. So naturally, more boys get accepted, and we have a huge sort of gender disparity. And so what we're proposing now is to actually start much younger to get girls kind of aware of this pathway for them, right? And I think personally that it starts with science camps, right? When they're 10, 11, 12, 13, they have to start that young in order to kind of build the pathway, in order for them to have, just as strong applications into universities for STEM when they're 18. So to your question about, do we treat them the same? In this case, no, I don't think we treat them the same. We need to target girls, when they're in middle school or junior high, right? And actually, provide an extra pathway, extra resources for this pathway, so that, they're able to get to that sort of more equal split between boys and girls.
Because we're fighting against something that is more cultural as well as more, I would say, something that it's an emotion, right? You're feeling a certain way, and maybe you're not choosing this path because of a certain way. So maybe
or just cultural expectations. Yeah. Okay, sorry. And you were about to ask another question to me.
Yes, I was just about to ask.
Oh, sorry. I've got this great quote, which came out of the research that we did into the STEM subjects. This is a quote that sticks with me. And this is a high school girl. And the quote is, "Girls are sensitive and boys are sensible." And it really struck me because it's actually it's a nice pithy quote, but that's how they think. Girls are sensitive and boys are sensible. So what does that even mean? If you're sensible, you choose science subjects. And if you're sensitive, what do you choose? I don't know. For me, it's quite a shocking comment. Yeah.
Yeah. Didi, I was actually just about to ask you a question, which is actually similar, is a follow-up to something that you said earlier. So I wanted to find out, because we are talking to an NGO right now, Aide Action, and I am curious because reducing gender inequality in education requires a concerted effort, right, by different sectors as well as different players. So what do you think are some of the obstacles that philanthropies like yourself can help NGOs or governments tackle when it comes to ensuring that their impact is scalable as well as sustainable?
I think one of the things, philanthropists who are outside of the country that they're trying to, see change in, I think one of the things they must do is visit the country and visit the actual location, right? And to visit the teams, right? So I don't see, the process of doing philanthropic work all that differently from my work in investments, right? If I'm going to choose a fund manager or if I'm going to choose an NGO to, make a grant to, you do your due diligence, right? You have to go and visit them, see what the leadership team is like. As I mentioned earlier, the leadership team should, even if it starts out as a foreign leadership team, there should be a plan in the actual strategy for a 5-year, 10-year plan to convert that to a local leadership team. I feel very strongly about that. So I think a question came up in the chat box about, whether we over rely on foreign resources. And yes, sometimes we do, because some of these countries, and I think we still need to, give resources to these countries because they have not yet pulled themselves out of the sort of poverty level in order to help themselves. They have no sort of they don't have enough local philanthropic money in order to replace the foreign philanthropic money, right? And but one thing we can do as foreign sort of philanthropic resources, is to start training local leadership, right? So to start to bridge the gap so that it's not like dependent on outside resources forever. In a place like China, I feel a little bit differently, right? It's the second largest economy in the world. There are a lot of tycoons and billionaires in the country. And I think there's a lot of wealth in the country and a lot of disparity in the country. So my feelings about, pouring resources into mainland China are very different from my feelings of pouring resources into Cambodia or Vietnam, right? And I think that I don't want to point fingers and say, oh, all the wealthy people in China should be the ones to then allocate resources, because actually they want to, but there's a lot of systemic kind of issues in place for them to not be able to do that in a very efficient manner, and it's not their fault, right? So I think every country is different, and I used to struggle with like, oh, if I keep giving resources to Cambodia, is it just perpetuating this cycle? But the flip side is, well, what are you going to do? Are you not going to do it because of this, right? So we continue to want to support places like Cambodia and Vietnam and India and so forth, because there's just not enough in place at the moment inside the country for them to for me to say, okay, let's pull out, let's just let them do everything. But the local team part is very important, I think.
Maybe I can go over to Savi. So Savi, you come from the NGO side, right? Are there certain gaps that you feel like philanthropists such as Seal of Love or other foundations or even the private sector can help NGOs tackle in ensuring that your impact is scalable and sustainable? Oh, Savi, you're on mute.
Thank you. I think that if you look back to situations, most of the government tries to develop the resources that they have to support. But if you look back at the situation, most of the countries, not just in Cambodia, when they develop resource allocations, mostly they would target the majority. Let's say that's not 90%. 90% of the target population, the student, would be targeted at the resource. But how about the other 10%, which is excluded from the society? And mostly that the resources are not allocated, especially the children from ethnic minority, children from different ethnic groups as part of society. They have a huge issue on the cultural barrier. So I think these are the entry point that most of the NGOs like Aide tries to work to reach the marginalized segment of the society where the government resources were not able to accommodate them. And obviously, we need support from a different actor. I think, as also the question in the chat book is also whether the government could stay work on this alone, but it's also the combination. I believe that the collective effort from all actors, philanthropists, other key foundation, key donors, development partner would play a very key role to support those who are already working on the sectors, working on the field that is a top priority, that could also working together hand in hand to support. I wanted to connect back a bit, with Jonah on the issue of gender violence for girls. Just the last 2 months, the girl in Cambodia, she was at high school, which is in the few weeks on that she needs to take exam, high school exam. While she was back from her class, she was raped and murdered. And so this is the issue has been affected society. It's to think about when a girl who actually at this age already was raped and murdered, how the other girl actually have a psychological effect, how the girl will feel of their safety when they go to school and they come back to school. So these are very key issues, and it was not addressed very well in the society. We are not properly addressing the gender violence very well. So I think as we work, we need to provide very safe space for the girl that they can feel safe. They can feel, if they are not feel safe, they will not be able to learn. Sometimes they are in the classroom, but they worry about when they leave the classroom, whether they are safe to be back home or not. So this kind of thing have a psychological effect to the girl, actually was not be able to concentrate in the classroom. So these are very key issues for us and also for general public to create a safe space environment for girls.
Thank you so much, Savi. So I'm conscious of time. We actually are already past 12 o'clock. So maybe let's quickly move into the Q&A, because I do see that some of you are already answering questions from the Q&A. There is a question from Joanna. Do you think that the problems with the education system for girls will be solved within the education system itself in the future? Or will these necessary problems be solved by private institutions?
Yeah, I think I touched a little bit on this earlier. I think it cannot be solved by the education system itself. It's a huge bureaucracy. It moves far too slowly. However, I think the education system in Hong Kong, working with an NGO, for example, like the Women's Foundation, which has a Girls Go Tech program, supports girls in schools through different methods, but also with the private sector as well. So the Girls Go Tech program, for example, is actually sponsored by a number of big corporates, Bloomberg, Accenture, etc. So there is an opportunity here really for different stakeholders to work together. It truly is in the interest of everybody to create smart girls, as well as smart boys, but smart girls who are going to enter the workforce later. It is a benefit to everybody for that to happen. And I think really the way around this is for all of these different stakeholders to work together.
Thank you so much, Joanna. I will take one more question from Savi. So Savi, Brian asks, how's your experience in working with the local governments as well as corporate or philanthropic donors on the ground? What are the opportunities as well as the challenges?
Thank you. When we design a project, we put very engaging process with the key stakeholder where we work with along with local government and also with the government, especially our project in Laos, for instance, on entrepreneurship support by L'Oreal Foundations. These are the key learning points, key learning approach that obviously our goal, for instance, to try to get back the girl to school. That is our ultimate goal. But if, for instance, there is no way that the girl will go back to school due to many circumstances, due to the family issue, then our program will focus on entrepreneurship, understand how we could support girls during this difficult time for them or during the transition. Or otherwise they would go to early marriage. So that's an issue we're facing. That's play a very crucial role how we contextualize our program to the specific need of the girl. And with that, with that concept, we essentially present to many donors, and we got support from L'Oreal Foundation, for instance, how we would be able to leverage this. These are the key challenges, because sometimes when the girl is actually already wanted to drop out, we try to support them as entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and also access to financial capital. Of these are the key issue we are addressing. And of course, when we look at the donor, of course, these are also the donor who are interested, because they're the emerging issue that's happening on the ground. So it's a win-win. For me, it's a win-win approach where we propose some sort of adapted solutions to the current need. But at the same time, it's also the priority of the corporate and philanthropic who wanted to support the most excluded population in the society. So for me, it's a win-win together when it comes to that support.
Thank you, Savi. So concluding this discussion, I would like to ask all of you, if you have one final thought or one thing that you want the audience to take away from this panel, what would it be? And also maybe perhaps how can individuals like ourselves contribute to the cause? Maybe we can go with Didi first. What's one thing you want the audience to take away from this panel?
I think if you are coming from a resource giving, like a grant making side of things, a philanthropic side of things, then really get to know what you're getting into by going and seeing and visiting yourself to understand the situation, and also over the long term to get more local stakeholders involved in the programming that you're doing.
Joanna, what about you?
I would say that we should look at education as not just about delivering content, but about picking up on the comments before, but about creating safe and inspiring spaces where young people, in particular girls, can really feel the confidence to start to learn to speak up for themselves and advocate for themselves and actually enjoy the process of learning. I think that's going to be really critical for their future pathways and for the success of our communities. And
Savi, what will be your final thoughts?
Thank you. I must say that I'm very lucky to have my single mother actually is very committed to support education. It was very difficult for her. She was grown during the genocide where herself could not go to a better education. But she believed education would be the future. I'm very lucky to have her support during a very difficult time after genocide. As you know, that's how the education system was just born after the genocide in Cambodia. I would say that to all the parents, it is very important that we need to support children in education. The role of the parent play a very, very crucial role to any father to ensure that their children will get to unlock their full potential for a very future.
Thank you so much to Savi, and thank you so much, speakers. That's all the time we have this afternoon. It's already 12 p.m. Thank you again for sharing your insights on this extremely complex issue. I know we have so many other questions that are left unanswered, and we have also answered many, many questions. Big thanks also to our partner, Aide Action International, for enabling today's discussion. And to all of you who are watching, thank you so much for tuning in and for listening all the way to the end. If you didn't get your questions answered earlier, please feel free to reach out to the Gen.T team, and we will help you connect with the speakers or help you ask the questions to them. For now, that's it from us. I hope you have a good Friday and hope to see you at the next Cloud Talk.